the instead in understanding the importance of the mental health aspect. I've seen it with my own children, the stress and the pressures that we have involved, and the ability to compete at high levels, be able to perform. And as a parent, just trying to look for those tools, find ways to add to my toolbox, ways in which I can work with my children and help them through the process of athletics. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Joe Jardine, who is the founder of the Reset Group, a company that helps athletes of all ages overcome mental obstacles by strengthening their mindset. Joe has spent the last decade as performance mindset with the NFL and NCAA players and coaches, and also is in private practice as a licensed marriage and family therapist. So I'm really excited that we're going to have Joe jump on in a moment. I'm going to pass this over right now to my associate AD, Karen Kabicki, who will lead us in prayer.
Good morning. If you will please bow your heads with me. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity for us to come together in community. Lord, we lift up our student athletes, our children, with everything that they undergo with stressors of school and sports, social and families. Lord, just please keep your healing hands upon them. Keep your healing hands upon their parents and our school teachers and counselors and administrators as we do our best to help and guide them through these different times. Lord, bless this time and Joe as his gifts that he is bringing upon us and this conversation. In your heavenly name, amen. Joe, it's all you.
All right, so let me kind of get us all dialed in with the share screen here. Let's do that. Do this. Stand by, as they say. There we go. Are we good? You guys see it? Are we good? Okay.
We're good.
Okay, just want that confirmation. So just to let you know, I went ahead and sent the PowerPoint for today and even a parent's guide for athletes to the school that I believe either they email it to you guys or it'd be available for you guys to have, just because I just feel like I wanted you guys as much opportunity of information that on athletes and what's going on with today with athletes and things like that. I mean, tools and strategies as possible. So I just kind of wanted to give as much stuff away. I often go fast. I go fast even with my lectures at school. And so I know that could be overwhelming for some people, but I want to make sure that you guys have the information that's there, because today we're talking about a lot of principles and actual practical tools that I think are very important that we can use just as parents with our kiddos. Once again, if you have questions on any of this, please ask. If you have questions, any clinical questions, my background is actually clinical psychology. And so if you have any questions about even things that are around depression, anxiety, feel free to ask that as well. And as mentioned, my background is clinical psychology, but I'm also a sports psychology professor. And so I'm kind of have a specialized practice where I bring the clinical and the sports together and do what we call performance mindset coaching. But it's really the aspect of just helping athletes just become a better or the best version of themselves in any ways that we can. I'm just happy I'm here today because anytime I could talk to a school from the Trinity League, it means that we could actually bring some faith-based approach to serious problems and really an invisible enemy that we're seeing a lot of our young athletes, which is their mental health, and specifically how to handle performance pressure for them and how to have a healthy relationship with their sport or a healthy relationship with their performance self. And we see this because so many of athletes' bodies are overworked and their mind is underdeveloped at all levels, including the NFL, including when it comes to Division I athletics, which ultimately leads to burnouts, plateaus, peaking. And what we see a lot of, especially junior year specifically, we see a lot of kids quitting their first sport. And they get into these other sports, like, for example, lacrosse. I see a lot of kids going from like baseball or soccer to lacrosse or track and field and things like that. I was thinking about a few years ago working with UST football. I was working with their linebacker coach about 5 years ago, and they had a major problem. And the problem is that a lot of freshmen were coming in, these 18-year-old, big boys, like men, and they had an inability to attend practice. They were having anxiety attacks in the dorm room, and they just couldn't leave it, and they're just emotionally paralyzed. And so they were starting to see this trend of how do we really help them out, mentally and emotionally, to be able to perform, or to even, play a game that they loved for so many years. And this is where we need to understand that mental toughness really comes from emotional wellness. And if you want to get anything today as parents, understand that mental toughness comes from emotional wellness. We get referred a ton of athletes to help them mentally, give them a mental edge. And we love helping athletes get mental edge, help them get mentally strong. And as we work with them, a lot of times, to be honest with you, it's really, they have emotional self issue. They have emotional issues. They have a hard time handling stress, fears, sadness, grief, failure within the sport. And we do more of that emotional work than we actually do mindset work, even though we call ourselves a performance mindset coaches. I was thinking about 7 years ago, we worked with a former NFL MVP, and he was having one of his worst years as a quarterback. The first half of the season was awful. So we were working with him, and people were concerned about his agent was concerned about his mindset, his mental game. The reality of it, his mental game was actually fine. What was really happening was emotional issues, stuff happening at home, relational issues, feeling overwhelmed about family stuff that was going on. And I think it's just a prime example where, your emotional self really drives your mental self on the sport, in the game. And, helping him with that, the byproduct, we actually had a fantastic second half of the season. But so often we think it's a mental thing, and it really, it's an emotional thing that's going on. And so for today, we have a theme, and we like to work in themes at the Reset Group. This is a theme verse that we give a lot of our athletes. A lot of our athletes believe in God. I think even if they don't believe in God, they still pray for good outcomes, as a lot of athletes do. And the theme verse that we use often is Proverbs 25:28. And it reads, like an open city with no defenses is the man with no check on his feelings. I'm going to say it again, like an open city with no defenses, I mean, a city that's just vulnerable for attack, is the man with no check on his feelings. Meaning, if you don't have skills to deal with your feelings daily as a athlete, as a student athlete, then they are vulnerable emotionally to performance pressure, to disappointments, to whatever things that happen in practice or the games. And that's really the theme for today as parents, is how do we develop our young athletes emotionally? How do we help them check what their feelings are, like the verse says? And I think even more importantly is, how do we develop a healthy identity as a student athlete that does not result in mental health issues? And for us to go this way, it begins with a question that we ask all of our athletes that we work with at all levels, which is, what defines you as an athlete? And that's the first question we ask all of our kiddos. Is it wins? Is it stats that define you as a scoreboard? Is it losses? Is it playing time? Is it parents? Is it coaches? Is it the fact is it God? And I say that because I was thinking 3 years ago, we did some, we just did some research on about 1,000 NCAA athletes who we're working with. We just asked them certain questions, and we asked them, what creates the most anxiety for you as an athlete? And by far, the number one answer was when mom and dad are in the crowd, which I actually thought was very telling and very interesting, that here's these stud athletes who obviously are in the top 5% of our nation playing in college, that mom and dad still have that emotional pull on them when it comes to it. And so this question is so important, because when you can name what defines you, when you name it, you can claim it. And the definition gives you direction, gives the athlete direction, and it tells them where to put their energy. And so we want this definition in so many ways to be like a filter to who they are, and a filter to how to take in hard emotions like failure, or how to take in hard emotions like disappointment. And the question, or not the question, but the concept behind the definition is that it allows our athletes to understand that when failure occurs, the failure is just a temporary setback, and not a mark of their character. It's not who they are. And that they are actually it's a temporary setback when things don't go away. They don't take it to heart. And failures don't define us. Obviously, wins don't define us. God defines us, and our value and worth, and God defines us. And so my foundation as a person, let's say it's like a believer or Christian, my foundation as a person needs to be the same foundation as me as an athlete. the aspect of having an audience of one. And so we try to shift the paradigm of their definition, realizing is what defines you is not your results. What defines you is how you handle the process as a man and woman of God. And yet so many athletes struggle with this answer to this question we give them, mainly because they never asked it. They were never asked. I was thinking about, we worked with Oklahoma State University's quarterback 2 years ago. When we asked him this question, it took him close to 24 hours to create a definition. He just didn't know what to do with it because they never asked the existential aspect of who they are. And so their identity as an athlete, when they don't know the answer to that question of what defines me an athlete, what happens is that their identity becomes something called transactional and not transformational. And so meaning this is that transactional is the athlete who is focused on the what. What do I need to do as an athlete? So for example, I have to lift weights 4 times a week. I have practice 6 days a week. I have 3 preseason games. I have to focus on my nutrition, protein shakes, get the right carbs, that kind of stuff. And then I have my regular season. And then so they're so focused on what they have to do that what happens is it actually creates high anxiety and high performance anxiety. When athletes are focused on the transaction, the what as an athlete in the sport, what happens is they become very burnt out and tired because the transactions are just too much. Our goal is to take the athlete from a transactional to a transformational athlete. And the transformational athlete is one that's focused on their why. Why do I play? Well, to connect with others, to learn to compete against myself, to be part of something greater than me, to learn to sacrifice, to learn to out-sacrifice others, to learn to out-sweat my competition. All things that really lead them to be great students, great leaders, great businessmen, women, spouses, and even parents one day. See, the sport is the vessel to their future self. And that's the concept we really try to talk to them about, is the why is important. When the why is greater than the what in the athlete, that's where we see a healthy functioning athlete. But when the what is greater than the why and they can't figure out what their why is, that's when they start complaining about, I don't want to practice anymore. This is too tiring. I'm too exhausted. I can't believe the season is this amount of games. And they start focusing on it. Let me tell you, I actually hear a lot in my practice right now with all my football players. Summer's coming and they know that practice is happening and on their mind is the beach. And they start telling me about, I can't believe coach moved their practice at nighttime. That means I can't go to the beach beforehand and get tired. I wish he did in the morning time. They get so focused on the what that it just feels overwhelming, creates anxiety for them. So what do we do with this? I mean, like, how do we help transition our athlete from a transactional athlete to a transformational athlete, especially when it comes to how they feel and what's going on with their mind? And really, it begins with a daily habit. And I'm going to tell you what the daily habit is so we get our clients of all ages. We keep it simple. We do it for all levels. We did this with the Cowboys 5 years ago and even with USC when we worked with them. And we really called it is the daily reset. And the daily reset is where you spend 1% of your day as an athlete. So 14 minutes a day, 14.5 to be exact, on what we call performance mindset journaling. And the key here is I don't want them typing it out. I don't want them, putting on their phone. They actually have to write it out, old school pen and paper. Why is that? Well, a few reasons. There's been a lot of research on journaling, especially with athletes in the last 5 years, specifically at ASU. And the most recent one happened about three months ago when they released it, is that journaling does a few things. Number one, it releases serotonin so they feel healthy, they feel happier. Number two, it releases actually dopamine, we found out, meaning that it makes them get excited for the future, right? Futuristic thinking in a healthy way. What also we found out is it's a place to basically take out the trash, the mental trash, the mind trash, whatever it may be. The brain needs a place to put things at. And journaling is a great place to put a lot of things. And so it allows them to free up space or free up some equity in their mind, right? We also know that it increases emotional intelligence, which we're going to talk more about this later, but it increases their EQ. Basically, journaling is tremendously helpful for an athlete, for anyone, for an athlete. You probably see even in the French Open, I forgot her name, but she, in between, every 2 games, you get a break in tennis, and she writes out her thoughts on the journal. You see this with baseball recently in the dugouts, that a lot of baseball players write out their each at bat as a way to kind of just close out and move on to the next. And so we want them to spend 1% of their day journaling. And how that works is this. We call it the 3-2-1 daily reset, which is every day we want them to write down 3 things they're thankful for. It could be something big or small. I don't care. You're thankful for Chipotle. I don't care. You're thankful for sleeping in, or you're thankful for mom and dad, or whatever it may be. 3 things you're thankful for. It could be the same thing every day. It could be something different. And really what this does is it actually awakens the association of abundance. And so if you have a kid who is, let's say, have anxiety is a mindset of deficits, is what is missing in my life when I don't have, and what do I need to have? Well, the opposite is actually thankfulness. It's gratitude. Scriptures in Philippians talks about this, that the antidote to anxiety is thankfulness. APA, American Psychological Association, every year says that anxiety is the worst emotion to feel, but then says the best emotion to feel is actually not happiness, it's actually thankfulness. And so when we actually write down 3 things we're thankful for every day, it actually provokes association around what I have versus what I don't have. Then we do is 2 things that they're excited about in the future. So I don't care if you're excited about one day go away to college, if it's one day they want to retire, if it's the one day they want to go to, Hawaii, or if it's just that this Saturday I can sleep in. How big or small, we don't care. And then we want them to do is write down 1 thing that they're accomplished today, and specifically in their sport. And so today, let's say, for example, I played baseball in high school and college. So let's say today I want to work on footwork. Maybe today the fact is I want to work better on hitting the ball on oppo, right? Going opposite field. Or maybe today is that I actually want to work on rest. And today I'm going to fast thinking about my sport. I'm going to fast not playing my sport. I'm going to give my body a rest, and actually want to give myself permission to give myself opportunity to invest in other people or other things. Where it may be, we want to write down, because you got to name it to claim it. It doesn't exist until it's down. And the last thing you do is you do a Dear God letter. And so we want to spend 14 minutes doing the 3-2-1 and then the Dear God letter. So the Dear God letter is actually an opportunity for them to write out their thoughts. Dear God, I'm feeling overwhelmed today. I feel sore. I feel like I can't give it my all. And you just write down what your thoughts are, good or bad. Then we want them to write down their feelings. Lord, I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling tired. I'm feeling excited. I'm feeling stoked today. Write down their goals in that Dear God letter. Lord, I just really want some prayer around, today I just wanted to be the leader that I need to be on the field. Write down their aspirations to God. It's basically it's like a daily devotion involved around allowing us to go to God for our thoughts, our feelings, our aspirations, our goals. And so we do that for 14 minutes. And the challenge here for a lot of kids, especially for teenagers, is to maintain that connection point within the journal for 14 minutes. I actually want them set a timer on their phone and actually make them happy and do that and help them expand their thinking around it. And for a lot of boys, this is really hard. It doesn't come natural for them. For a lot of girls, it's a little bit easier. A lot of women, it's a little bit easier to have that connection point. And by far, this is probably the hardest thing we have athletes to do, but it's by far probably the best thing that all of our athletes we work with say, I'm so thankful I learned this skill and habit, including when it comes to our professional players that we use. And it's a habit that they actually do for a very long time. Now, when should we do this? Well, I recommend to do it in the morning time. We have a mantra that says, win your day by noon. Win your day by noon. So do your workouts by noon, especially in the summertime. Do your workouts by noon, do your drilling by noon. And the reason why we want to do is we want the morning to be a priming technique for our athletes. And so my athletes are in high school. I challenge them to wake up for 14 minutes early and don't get out of bed. Just have it by you. Get the pen and paper, do your 14 minutes before you get up. And then when you get that done, you're primed for your day. And what research found out about journaling is you don't feel the results right away. It takes about 2 to 3 hours to see a change of brain, change of release in serotonin dopamine about 2 or 3 hours later. And so the effect of it is actually a little bit delayed. And so it's good for them to understand that, to know that. So why does this matter? Well, because developing a healthy identity in sports begins with healthy habits. Writing is where it begins, because journaling is a form of measurement, and we need to measure what we manage in life, and especially when it comes to athletes. And so how do we measure what we need to manage? Well, we journal, we write it out. And in this case, it's our emotional and spiritual wellness and our mental toughness. It's keeping our behaviors aligned with our beliefs. It's developing a healthy identity. And it's so important to write it out, because if you don't write it out, right, or we're talking about a second, or talk it out, you'll act it out. And so I think we need to recognize is writing out and also talking out, which we'll get to here, which is an important part of our identity as well as an athlete. And it keeps us from actually acting out as an athlete, which we'll get here in a second as well. And so writing out helps develop healthy communication to self, to God. But then also that aspect is we got to teach our kids to also, in many ways, learn to talk it out and how we feel to others. And if we have an opportunity, we have an athlete that talks that and writes that out on a daily as much as we can, it keeps them from actually acting out. What's the acting out mean? Well, stress, anxiety, right? They start self-imploding, right? Or maybe it's poor performance on the field. Here's a great way to look at it. If you have an athlete that performs better in practice than you do in the game, it's because they have performance anxiety. And the way that we overcome performance anxiety is we first start by writing it out, the journaling we talked about, and then we start talking it out with our athlete. And so there has to be a dialogue when it comes to what they're going through. And too many athletes keep it in. They try to self-preserve because that's kind of what they're taught as athletes, be tough. And so the difference between a healthy athlete and an unhealthy athlete, to be honest with you, is an unhealthy athlete comes into us and they have a monologue. And the monologue is either some type of anxious loop that they feel they have a fear of failure or even fear of success at times. Or they have a monologue that feels like they're never good enough, they're never going to have playing time, and they just play this negativity. Or they have a monologue where they feel like they're letting people down, mom down, or they feel like they can never be the best or they can never start. They just have a monologue. And the healthy athlete has a dialogue. And they have a dialogue with who? With God, prayer, with parents, with coaches, therapists, whatever it may be. And so we want to transition them from a monologue to a dialogue. And so when that happens, that is when their emotions no longer control them, but they start controlling their emotions in many ways, the thoughts. And this is where we need to help our athletes have a voice. And we need to advocate for our athletes and help them understand what to do with their feelings, who to express it to. Like as parents, I would encourage your athletes so much to go to their coaches and learn to have an open dialogue with them about their frustrations, about their, of course, if they're hurt, if they're injured, if they need a mental health break. This is where we need to do it. And I know I talked to your guys' athletic director a few weeks ago, and we really talked about how much Orange Lutheran is a really safe place for this. It's a great environment to start practicing your athlete, having really being their own advocate verbally, regarding to their wants and needs. And this is going to be a tremendous asset for when they're in college, especially doing professors and coaches. I think about big difference between college and high school sports is, a lot of colleges, the coaches they have a really good relationship with their athletes, open dialogue about family, all that kind of stuff, things like that. In high school, it's not so much, it's a little more preservation. I also think the fact is I think about, teaching in the last 12 years, the biggest difference is in the last 5 years, I've dealt with more emails from teachers regarding grades, from parents regarding grades than I do from students. And so it's just been this shift where parents are still continuing to go to bat for their kids in college versus the student doing it for themselves. And I think it's because we just never taught them in high school how to be their own advocate. And so I really encourage to help develop that muscle for them. I think it's good for them, not just mentally, but emotionally, for them to develop it. And your school is a great place for that. And this is where I want to talk about emotional intelligence, EQ, and how do we help our kids deal with how they feel, and how we help them to deal with their emotions and to recognize it. There was a great book, and you might want to write it down. It's called Permission to Feel. And Permission to Feel is by Dr. Mark Brackett. And he's the emotional intelligence, he's the EQ director at Princeton University. This is the guru around emotional intelligence. And he talks a lot about, as parents and as coaches, how do we develop the sense of emotional intelligence, the aspect of, helping our kids understand how they feel, but then what do we do with that emotion? So we're talking about things like, how to deal with stuff like with even like suicidal thoughts, how do we deal with deep, dark depression to anxiety, things like that. And this is his stuff, not mine. So I want to make sure he gets the kudos here. So Dr. Brackett came out with 4 questions that as parents as coaches, we could ask our athletes or our teens about how they feel and how to increase emotional intelligence. This is says we should do is the first question we should ask them says, what are you feeling? Simple question. What are you feeling? He says this is a great way for them to label and recognize emotions themselves. And they have the inability to label it. That's where we come in with empathy and tell them, hey, I think you're feeling sad. I think this is called depression. What are you feeling? Second question he says, and you ask him is, what is causing you to feel this way? I mean, understand the cause. Is it situational? Is it environmental? Is it relational? Is it a coach, a girlfriend, boyfriend? Is it a parent? Is it a peer? Is it a person? Is it an environment? Is it school versus like work versus home versus batting practice or what it may be? Is it situational? It happens in the games, but not in practice. So what is causing you to feel this way? The third question he says you should ask is, who should you express it to? That's interesting. Recognize who's the correct person you go to. I'm not talking about, let's not gossip about this. Let's really figure, who do we talk? Do we talk to coach? Do you talk to a teammate? How does that go? And the fourth question you should ask is this: how should you express it? Meaning, do you text them? Do you call them? Do you email them? Do you do it in person? The last question is about how do you regulate your emotions? Where do you put it at? Those four questions are tremendous when it comes to helping our kids go from monologue to a dialogue and to increase their emotional intelligence. It's a great way as parents for us to walk through and process it. I have 2 kids. These 4 questions are on our refrigerator that we actually often get out and say, okay, let's go through it. Let's go through our feelings here. And so this is just an all around great way for them to process their feelings and thoughts, and a great way, honestly, for you as parents to help formulate conflict resolution skills in your kid's life. And so a question that we get often is, what do you do with student athletes who are feeling extremely overwhelmed with anxiety and pressure? And this is probably something that comes up often, right now, which is a lot of teenagers are feeling this intense sense of performance pressure and they end up quitting. And I think for us to understand it is, I think we need to know the 3 situations that create emotional turmoil in our athletes. And so I think this is really important as parents for us to recognize. And here's the 3 right here, is that the 3 situations that create emotional turmoil for our athletes, or really anyone, is the following: when circumstances are uncontrollable, when people are unchangeable, or when problems are unexplainable. I'll go through them again. When circumstances are uncontrollable, when the kid feels like I have no control, I feel helpless at what's going on with me at school or as in the sport. The second one is when people are unchangeable, when people around me are uncooperative, or they feel stuck in a relationship. So that could be with a coach, it could be with a teacher, it could be with a teammate, what it may be. And the last one, problems are unexplainable. I just keep getting injured. I can't buy a break. When one of those 3 is existing and it's being unresolved or it's being prolonged in our kid's life, this is where we usually see suicide ideation in athletes. It's also where we usually see depression, anxiety in athletes. It's actually where we often see mental fatigue, emotional burnout. And so recognize this as parents when these 3 things are in there. That's not just with kids, that's just with anyone, including adults as well. So what do I do if this is happening? As a parent, how can I actually help there are some practical ways I actually can help my athlete to go through this. And I would say, as a parent, the first step is meet your athlete where they're at. Meet them where they're at. Your greatest asset as a parent is empathy, and your greatest currency is encouragement. I'm going to say it again. Your greatest asset as a parent is empathy, and your greatest currency is encouragement. So use it, and use it often. You also have to understand that you have to grab their attention before you can teach them. And a lot of times we go after teaching first. And we got to recognize this. We got to grab their attention. And how we grab their attention is through empathy. Empathy grabs the kid's attention. Expressing and seeing what they're feeling and letting them know that you know how they're feeling builds that trust. It builds and grabs their attention. Recognize that empathy builds equity in your team's heart. What if my kids want to hear from me? My kid doesn't care, doesn't want to have a conversation with me. Well, you begin with empathy. You meet them where they're at. Empathy builds trust. At this age, especially teenagers, they need more trusting moments than teaching moments. It's kind of my kid at baseball. He's it's like struck out looking a fastball down the middle. First thing I want to tell him is like, why are you not looking? Like, how are you not sitting fastball here, bud? But I realized it's just, he's feeling sad. And so as a baseball player, I want to, of course, as a coach, I want to respond to the practical. But I got to just bite my tongue, and especially as a competitor, and just realize he needs to be heard and felt, and allow the coaches coach him. And so we see empathy in action is when you respond to their emotions and not your solutions. Write that down if you're taking notes. Empathy in actions with athletes is when we respond to their emotions. I respond to how my kid feels, not with my solutions. It's not a quick fix, but quick to listen. And so we need to recognize that we need to recognize when things like in our team's life are too hard as parents. If our kid is struggling, at times we just need to be the referee in their life and just tell them and to give them permission to stop overtraining, stop overworking or obsessing or fixating, and recognize when it gets to that point, maybe they also may need some professional help. The kids just don't say it. They show it before they say it. And so make sure that as parents, sometimes we just have to get in there and really start, checking and say, hey, I just realized, I think you're too obsessed over this right now, the sport. I think it's unhealthy for you. I think we need to take some time off, take a break. So they need us to come in and give them that permission, because a lot of times they won't do it themselves. The next thing here is what kids need is they need for us to start implementing weekly self-care. Yes, weekly. We rest just as hard as we work. Mental and physical recovery needs to be a priority in our kids' lives, especially because of the Trinity League. All of our Trinity League clients that we work with they lack tremendously the skill of self-care. They do. They really do. And this is not about balance, because the reality is that, guys, like it's impossible for us to achieve balance. This is about margins, helping our kiddos work with margins, helping them create weekly self-habits as an athlete, giving them the permission to participate in activities outside their sport. Even that's another sport per se, prioritizing like youth group, church events, rest, relaxation. And most of the problems that we find with athletes, honestly, we work with, especially when it comes to Trinity League, isn't their lack of hustle or work ethic. I'd be honest, a lot of athletes from specifically, your guys' league, a lot of them are just overachievers. They come from overachieving families, overachieving parents. And so it's not the lack of hustle or ethic per se that they have, but it's just their inability to understand, how do I reload emotionally, mentally? How do I recover? Basically, how to have self-care. And if we wait until self-care is one of those things where they feel tired or quote burnout, it's too late. And self-care is really it's a crisis prevention, not crisis control. And those who get, especially as athletes, endure longevity, and those who don't quit. Reality of it. And this is where you got to know, like your kid, you got to know your student athlete and talk to them really purposely about what does weekly self-care exercises look like? What is it for them? Some of them may be really introvert. I was an introvert, especially as an athlete. So I just need to be time at home. I just need to be alone. I need to veg. I need to watch TV or play video games. I was thinking, 6 years ago, I worked with Athletes First, which is one of the top two agencies for NFL. And their combine, they have a pre-combine in basically the Costa Mesa, Santa Ana area, where the athletes for about, I think, 60 or 90 days, they live in this basic combine and where they live there, right? It's like a building. They live there. The roof is where they actually do all their workouts and performance. They have chefs where they eat, so they live there. They don't leave. And the president of the agency gifts each one of them a PlayStation, which is kind of odd, I felt. And so I asked him, why do you give every athlete their own PlayStation for their room? And he said, it's because we want them to actually have time off, let their brain rest, and just do something outside of just the sport. Do something outside of the training. Basically says this is their self-care. This is us promoting self-care. They can't leave. They eat, sleep, and work out here to get in the best shape of their life, to get the best numbers they can for the combine. And we recognize we had to have opportunity for them to do something else, think about something else, and just kind of many ways be mindless. And so if it's important for them, it's got to be important for our kids. Now, other kids might be more extroverted and maybe they need to be seen and go out more, or they, need to go to Disneyland, do the stuff because they get their energy from others. But either way, be purposeful and make it a weekly routine. And I know this goes against the all or nothing attitude, win at all cost culture that we live in. But the reality of it is the rat race mentality breeds a try harder, trust less. Try harder, trust less of your talents, trust less of your skills. It's just a try harder. In the day, if you win that rat race, you're still a rat. And so we guys recognize that this causes burnout, and it's really, it creates this crisis that we've been hearing for the last 3 months with student athletes. So prioritize self-care. I was thinking, when I was in my clinical program, we were forced to take a semester class, a 3-unit class. It was mandatory for us to graduate on self-care. Like seriously, the whole semester was teaching us how to not burn out and how to stay healthy and to really teach us how to care for ourselves. And I was thinking, like, why is that? It's because it's not natural. It's just not natural. Even though we're going to school to learn about the business of caring for others, we just lack the skills to learn to care for ourselves. And this is our university telling us you got to prioritize this, or you can't help others until you really help yourself first, right? And so that's how important it is. It's important for adults going to the helping business. How much more is it important for us to teach it for our kids and not to do that? I was thinking, my own parents, but they're doing this, but baseball, especially baseball in Orange County, where I played, baseball is all year round. Our weather is beautiful. It's gorgeous. And so we could play all year round, especially with all these different teams that we could be on. But I remember from July 15th, which is when summer ball ended, at least for school, from July 15th until school started, which is usually like the last Thursday of August for us at my school, my parents did not allow me to play baseball, work out, take protein shakes. They didn't allow me to pick up a ball, go on a field. They called it a Sabbath month. And we just they forced me and my sisters who played sports to not play a sport for a whole month. Let our body recover, let our brain recover. It's when we went fishing. It's when we went to do our vacations. And they just allowed me to be a kid with no pressure. They took it away. Was there opportunities to do showcases? Yes, but we said no. Why? Because we trust God. We try less. Did they allow me to, did they keep me from going to be part of like a, like a wooden bat league to be seen for scouts? Yes, I didn't play in it. Why? We trust God more, try less. That's the message. Do I want that? No, but my parents came in and said, we're the referee here. And so it's just food for thought and ways to, we could teach with our words, but we transfer who we are to our kids. And that's what we transfer to our kids, is by having those actions. So what leads to athlete burnout? Like what creates it? 'Cause that's such a big word these days. And I would say is by far, your kid is burned out in a sport when they say the following words: I'm not having fun. I'm not having fun. And I'm telling you, it is nearly impossible for us to get an athlete going again in a sport when they say those words. I mean, it is. We have so many athletes that come to us and they tell us, I'm just not having fun in football. I'm not having fun in hockey. I'm not having fun in baseball. And I'm telling the parents want us to do magic to get them going again. It's really too late. We just can't. We can't. It's really hard with the minds there to flip it, and really that's when that's when they start pivoting to a different sport. But it's really hard. But when the kid says that, they're in burnout mode. They're in burnout mode. And what I want you to know is, and I have it right here on the slide, is I really believe there's 4 variables to burnout. And here's the 4 variables. Burnout occurs when self-care wasn't prioritized, when margins weren't implemented, when boundaries weren't set, and identity wasn't defined. So when weekly self-care is not prioritized, it leads up to burnout. When margins were implemented, we mean by margins. And I need kid just say, I need a self-care day. Or I need kid say, it's okay for you not to work out. Take a day off. We need margins. Boundaries weren't set. Hey, between July 15th until you start school, we're having a boundary here. Reinvesting in other things. Or when identity wasn't defined. Meaning like the question, what defines you? What defines you as a person the same thing needs to define you as an athlete. We're not result oriented, we're process oriented. It's about engaging. Like, what is God trying to tell me during this time of the process of my sport? What's God trying to tell me during the time of my injury? What's God trying to teach me during this time? And so here's my challenge for this summer, and I do this with all my clients is, summer's coming up here. And as parents, my challenge is that at some point, you need to sit down with your athlete. And my suggestion is give them a breakfast burrito or in an hour, something where they're eating, because they're always happy when they're eating. And so give them some food and sit them down. And I would say, hey, this next school year, we can't repeat last school year, this school year. If last school year was good, I want this school year to be great. If last school year was hard, I want this school year to be a lot easier. I don't want to repeat last year. And so here's some questions I have, Bud. What changes do we need to make this next year a healthier one? Not a happier one. Life's not always happy. A healthier one. Sleep. Is it food intake? What do we need to do to create margins this next year? What can I do as a parent to hear you better? I just feel like I could have heard you a lot better last year, and I just feel like I have improvement. What can I do to hear you better this year? I really want to know. Or maybe the question needs to be is, how do we implement for the next 9 months of school, one in which we bring back fun for the next 9 months out of this year? What does that look like? And that's really just, it's the great reset that needs to begin, and we all, my parents did it for me every summer. I do it for my kids every summer. It's like, we just had to sit down. I was like, hey, let's come together. Let's make next year better, different than it was. With all my parenting classes I do, I always end it with this right here. As parents, you may feel incompetent, but with God, you're more than competent. I think as parents, we have so much stuff going on that our parents didn't have to go through with us. And I think it could be it's overwhelming for me at times. And so as parents, we may feel incompetent, but with God, you're more than competent. And I say this because I just got my new textbook for my adolescent class. I also teach adolescent psychology at the university. And the first chapter and the first sentence says this: sociologists believe that the hardest time in US history to be a teenager is now. What a great opening line for a textbook for my kids. So they believe more than like Civil War, World War II time. And then they started naming all these stats regarding depression, anxiety, suicide rate, divorce rate, fatherless generation. They just went out and reasons why. I read that and took it this way: if it's the hardest time in American history for teenagers, that means it's the hardest time for parents to parent in the United States history. It's hard. There's a lot of active enemies out there that we don't see. They're invisible. Right. And we see that, especially if you're in the trenches with athletes. We see a lot. We see it there all the time. And so this is where I give my shameless plugs. And so if you're like, man, Joe, I really love your voice. Well, I have a podcast. We talk about anxiety and we actually talk about performance anxiety. If you're interested, follow it, check it out. We do, my wife and I, who's really the host of it. And we talk a lot of stuff about stuff we're talking about today. And it's even good for your athlete to even listen. We have a 2-part series about performance anxiety, 5 ways to overcome it, things that we give our athletes. Feel free to check it out. We have a blog on our website as well, if you're interested in reading more. If you're like, man, I really love that journaling idea, I want my kid to start doing it. Here's the journals that we have. We the one about the 30-day reset journal. It's actually has to do with athletes. It's great it's a great preseason journal to start thinking about communication, start thinking about the aspect of goal making. It has the 3-2-1 in there. We've done this with several Division I schools. We've done it for football teams, volleyball teams, girls volleyball. We've done it with even local high schools in Orange County area. It's a great just for them to go through. We also have the daily reset, which is just the 3-2-1 only. So 30 days worth. Just a great way for them to understand how to do journaling. It's just a great opportunity for them to put pen to paper. And it should only 14 minutes a day, 1%. That's all it takes to get them mentally strong, emotionally well when it comes to it. But feel free to check us out at the resetgroup.com. Like I said, our background is actually clinical, mixed in with the sports psychology. So we do it all. We do marriage and family counseling, but we also have is every August, we start our athlete reset groups, which is twice a month, the second and fourth week of every month. We do this right here is me and other coaches, and I bring on other people who, that I've worked with, and we talk about all things about athletes' toughness and mental toughness, emotional wellness. And then we do question and answers afterwards. And so it's a really great way. It's just some people they feel like they can't afford therapy and things like that. This is less than a copay a month that allows people to come in, and it's for parents, it's for athletes, and for coaches. And we start that up for the school year every August. So feel free to check that out. But that is my shameless plug right there of the day. So for now, I think we're stop, and we will do some questions and answers. If we have any questions, maybe not.
Yes, we do. And I'm sure they will start kind of rolling in here too. Well, thank you so much, Joe. So much good stuff to think about, especially even for ourselves. So really appreciate you being here. So a couple questions to start out. Let me get back to our chat. So Jean, you asked if the journal is mandatory for every athlete and if it's turned in at the end of the season. So this is, I don't know if this is maybe an Orange Lutheran question. So this is not a part of our sort of like athletic programming, if that's what you were asking. But maybe Joe, I guess if you've utilized it with teams before, if you want to speak on how you usually do that.
Yeah, so we have utilized it with teams before. We've had it where, we utilize it for high school, for club sports and junior high. We really work with people 13 and older. Before that's kind of, it's too young, but yes. And so one of them is we really call it preseason, the 3-day reset journal, where we would do is it's a 5-week program where we've introduced the journaling part of it. We actually give them a workshop where we talk about how to develop their mindset, like how to define it. And then we go through the journaling. The coaches do it as well. And we kind of facilitate it once a week about a check. And we don't check their journals. We want that to be personal. They need sacredness in their life. And so, but we do have conversations around it. Some coaches and a lot of college coaches see us do it once. They said, we'll just buy the journals and do it ourselves as an opportunity to create that dialogue with them. And so it is mandatory for all the athletes that we work with. They have to, this is the skill that we begin with, and they start and they fight us the most, but at the end, they never stop because they see the results. It's just super healthy for them, and they realize that. And so we do it with teams of all ages, but we also just recommend coaches to be that point as well, is go through it and just, it's a great opportunity to do that. I was thinking about Vanderbilt baseball and how Vanderbilt baseball, I forgot the coach's name, where he spends the first 20, 30 minutes in the classroom before practice. And he checks in with his players to say, how are you feeling? And what are you thinking? It's just a check-in. I just want to know, as a human being, I love you. How are you doing? And we worked with a local university called Vanguard University, their volleyball team, and they started implementing journaling about 4 years ago as their preseason. And then the coach, who she played at USC, started doing the same thing now, where it's like for 10 minutes, I just want to check in. Where are we at personally before we get on there? And so knowing that the personal performance really drives the professional performance or the athletic performance in life, right? So not sure that answers the question, but yes, we do it. It's mandatory for my athletes I work with.
Perfect. Jean is smiling. So I think that's a good sign that we got her question answered. Okay. This is a good question, I think. So thoughts on dual sport athletes. So still finding a way to kind of maintain that margin and working some of this stuff in if you're playing more than one sport, or really there are some sports that might as well be dual sport because they're just about year round. So some strategies there.
Well, I would say is some of the most healthiest athletes we have are dual sports that we've worked with. I think dual sports actually naturally creates margins for sports, right? Stop and then start another one. It really helps them obviously physically and mentally. I was thinking, so much, I know this is talked about a lot, but I grew up in time in Orange County where we all played multiple sports. You're weird if you didn't. It's like, if you play football, you had to do track and field. I played basketball and baseball. And so it kind of naturally allowed our body to heal, kind of naturally allowed our mind to take a rest about certain pressures of different sports. So I'm for it. I know there's been some, feedback about some coaches might not be it, but I've actually seen some of the healthiest people we've worked with are dual sport. And so I'm for it. I'm okay with it. I like it. I don't see much burnout now. If there is a burnout, if the kid, right, if the athlete just cannot handle it, and we recognize that, and they're holding on to these two sports, but we see what's holding on is really killing them. It's like just destroying who they are. I think that's where we come in as referees and say, okay, we really need to choose and double down on one. And what does that look like? And what do you want that to be? It's that, or we need to learn a better way to have a healthier relationship to these sports. Playing sports is a lot like marriage. Like being an athlete, it's like you're married to the sport. And so, how we relate to that sport, a lot of times we see it generates in how we relate to other areas of our lives. And so at this age is a lot of great lessons for them to learn about that, not just about themselves, but also just about, how do I relate to my performance and my loves and my likes? And what happens if one of them starts really creating unwanted emotions in my life? What do I do with that then? So I think there's a lot of great lessons there. But that's kind of my advice when it comes to, I would talk to them out and figure out if they need to double down on one, if that's the issue. And if they're like in a sport like we all are in Orange County, where they play all year round now, especially like soccer, I would say the top sports we see burnout on by far is women's soccer. We see a ton of burnout right now. Volleyball, women's volleyball, football, and oddly enough, hockey, which I didn't even know is a sport in Orange County. And so it doesn't snow, so I was like, what happened here? Those are probably the 4 sports we see the most of burnout right now in our practice, probably the last 6-7 years. But yeah, to answer the question, I don't know.
I think so. All right, as we wait for a few more to trickle in, I got one for myself. So I think we see a lot of students, like you were talking about, just learning those self-advocating skills. So I think sometimes finding that balance as a parent of, all right, at what point do I have that conversation with the coach so that my child sees that I'm advocating on their behalf, but making sure to encourage them to kind of have those first conversations. Maybe you could give some tips on how to figure out when it's time for you to maybe step in and have a conversation with a coach versus really making that about your student having that conversation, whether they kind of like the response or not.
I think you step in when the interaction is exasperating to the student athlete, and the student athlete's experience with that, let's say in this example, is the coach becomes, it provokes anger and frustration. And so maybe the athlete's just not mature enough to do it. But in that case, is I still want to do is we do it together. I'm not going to do it alone. Let's do it together. Let's have a conversation. I'm going to set a meeting for us and for you and I and the coach to talk together. And that's what I would suggest. I would never do it alone. But I think when the moment is I think twofold is first, if the kid's just having like an anxiety attack, just thinking about having a meeting with a coach, or just not emotionally developed yet to have it, then we'll do it together. Secondly, I think it's when they actually have the conversation or they had the interaction and they walk away feeling immensely discouraged to the point of being exasperated, then I think we need to then step in as well, because that's not healthy for the kid as well. And so, but what we're really trying to teach them is what, how do you adapt to different personalities in life? You're not gonna have a great boss one day, and maybe at times you might not even have a great professor, but yet you have to still stick with it. So how do we adapt? And so I would always problem solve. It's like I do with my own kids. Let's problem solve first on our own. How do we make adaptations when people have just some slightly uncomfortable personalities? We have porcupines and we have bunnies in this world. Sometimes coaches could be bunnies. Sometimes they can be porcupines. It's hard. And so how do we adapt to it?
Love that. Thank you. All right. We got one. If a student athlete is playing video games as a form of self-care, how much time is ideal and healthy for this? Well, I suppose you could probably do a
no more
whole
than
presentation.
Yeah, I do have a great presentation. I do have a great presentation on screens and teams. No more than 2 hours a day. Anything more than 2 hours a day on screens, on video games, it creates neurofatigue, high levels of cortisol, and you're going to see general anxiety disorder. That's based on the Pediatricians of America research that was done almost 7 years ago. If you want to know information about it, you can read 2 books, one called Digital Invasion, the other one called Irresistible, and both of those will make you have nightmares at nighttime. And so just to be aware, but no more than 2 hours a day for if kids from 13 older, 18 and older. There's not much research on it, but the brain development starts occurring a little bit more. And so because of that, we don't see as much neurofatigue. And neurofatigue is seen as this inability to sleep at nighttime, that they can't retain memory. So they study, but they can't like retain it. They are like a zombie, like you see them, they just feel exhausted and tired, they're cranky. They basically, as I say, is they go from Jesus to Judas in a matter of seconds. And so there's that threshold where they just become teenage tantrums at home, and they don't want to do their homework. You ask them to do a task after they play video games, they just fight it and they don't want to do it. That's neurofatigue. And we didn't have a lot of cases of neurofatigue until smartphones came out. And you can read more about this from the book Irresistible. But let me tell you, who's done a lot of research on this: the Navy, the military. The Navy has a tremendous amount of research they've been doing revolving around video games, because they're seeing differences in their I'll say soldiers, I think it's army, but in their kiddos. And so what they're seeing is that there's a change of personality, that there's resistance, but also there's just a tremendous amount of depression as well. And so they get on these ships and they give them a ton of video games. They play during their off time for 10, 12 hours a day of these 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. And they realize it's just way too much. It creates neurofatigue. And so they've done a ton of research regarding it, which is really interesting. The book Irresistible talks a lot about it. So no more than 2 hours a day for teenagers. And all your kids right now are sending me hate mail and are giving me horrible reviews on Google, probably because I just said that. It's a joke.
It's all good. Part of our job sometimes as parents is to irritate our kids a little bit. So
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So last question we got thus far. Jim asks, what's your approach to working with performance anxiety? So Jim, I would say definitely, if you maybe missed part of the beginning, go back through. I would say the bulk of the presentation was about that, but do you want to give a couple quick refreshers?
Yeah, I just think, first of all, we define it as athletes who perform better in practice than they do in the game is really what we see, or the inability for them to attend practice or things like that because of anxiety. There's really five tools for anxiety, performance anxiety. The parent guide actually, I believe, has all 5 for you. If not on our website, you could get it for free. They're all there. But it involves, there's the actual aspect of performance anxiety is it goes around a few things. It evolves around actually a certain style of breathing for the athlete. So it's something you have control over and increasing the oxygen levels. Posture, there's a lot of research around posture and performance anxiety, which this is, I could talk about this for an hour. So, that's important. We found out that journaling, performance journaling, this is why we really, talk about this when it comes to performance psychology, where journaling actually eliminates a lot of performance psychology. And here's the reason why. Journaling actually activates and is seen as what we call visualization techniques. So if you're a USC guy, we call it imprinting. Stanford calls it visualization techniques. It's the same darn thing, guys. And so And what happens is journaling actually activates kind of this aspect of visualization or imprinting, where it basically puts the brain in the aspect of the athlete being in the game itself. Like it works out those neurotransmitters or neuromapping, as we say. So they actually get into it. The brain's already been worked out through processing it through journaling, that the levels of anxiety go tremendously low. Actually, there's research that Stanford did with golfers, NCAA golfers, and they had 3 groups: people who did the drilling and the visualization, the imprinting, and then the group that didn't, and then the group, they can do whatever they want basically. And so the result of it is those who did the journaling and the imprinting technique, that their golf game was tremendously increased. They actually chose the worst, I think the 30 worst golfers at MCA that year to help them with their putting. And so when it comes to performance anxiety, is how do we put our mind, our brain, desynthesize on the off hours and actually visualize successes and help them to be put in that game style moment and imprint who they want to be. Well, you do that by actually sitting down, visualizing it for 5 minutes a day, which is what they found out. But the second thing is they actually write about it. And so I go back to is, if you write it out, you won't act it out. And performance anxiety is acting out. And so, but the other part of it is you have to develop a mindset. Like, you cannot have a mindset. People are like, I don't have a mindset, I'm good. Everyone thinks when they play, right? Obviously, when you're in a zone, you're just reacting, right? But athletes they have 2 brains. They have a low and a high, as we call it, and one's unconscious, one's conscious. And so what happens is that we need to develop the high conscious brain, and how we do that, or high track brain, as we call it, and how we do that is we develop a certain thinking style. And so on the parent guide that I gave you guys, I actually walked through the 5 steps to develop a mindset. And I'll give you a couple of hints here. Is when we have someone with performance anxiety, we instantly delete their authoring or the narrative of their life, and we narrow it down to 2 sentences: I will and I am. Let's say for baseball, I will get hit. I am going to get hit. I will throw a strike. I am going to throw a strike. Because a lot of people with performance anxiety has can't, won't, and don't. Can't, won't, and don't is not interpreted by the brain. And so what happens is that monologue, can't, won't, don't, like, I can't miss a free throw. Your brain just interpreted it as I will miss a free throw. And so we narrow down their self-talk to the I will and I am statements. And this is not me. This is actually USC's performance psychology department has narrowed down actually what to say to actually motivate your kid, actually give them confidence. Like, what's the best self-talk? And so we narrowed down to I am, I will, to eliminate in so many ways, the performance anxiety. The reality of it, we all have anxiety when we play. Those who don't are they're weird. And so as some part of it is you have to play scared, or you have to play anxious to then override. So we want to test it. But most athletes don't have a planned strategy. So they feel they're like a dog without a leash. So they don't know where to go. And so a planned strategy, like just narrow it down to either breathing technique or things like that, gives them a planned strategy to like bring all the butterflies together and say, let's go and let's trust this. And that's what you need to do. And it's not as easy as getting like the 5 steps. It's actually figuring out what exactly are you anxious about? When does it occur? Why does it occur? And then from there, we create a strategy to help them out. Does that make sense? I don't know. I hope it does.
I think so.
It's a lot. It's a cool part. We talk about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're past our 10 o'clock time here. If anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to put them in the chat. But thank you so much, Joe, for coming today. Tons of great content. And just so everybody knows, the recording will be sent out by the end of the week. And that will include the slides and the extra parent guide that Joe referenced, but you can find all kinds of other good stuff on his website. So really super duper appreciate you. As a reminder, the counseling department is always here for your students as well. So please encourage your students to come in and speak with us. If they're having an issue of some sort, sometimes we can be a great go-between between the student and the coach, even to help get everybody on the same page. So just know that we have a very robust offerings within our department. We're always happy to help kind of mediate anything if need be. But I'm really happy that our athletics department has started to place such a huge emphasis on the mental health piece of things. You know, it's been an important part of our culture, our whole school, but having that extra buy-in from coaches and from Coach Brown here is really great. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
All right.